Meet Erik Kondo, a paraplegic inventor with a unique perspective on the possibilities of wheelchair mobility. From wheelchair skateboarding to affordable DIY innovations, he has a vision of a better system that would benefit all wheelchair users. With almost 40 years of experience, he exposes the flaws in the wheelchair industry where custom-fitted chairs are marketed as perfect fits, yet fail to adapt as users' needs change.
For most people, you don't have an unlimited amount of money. So the question is, how can we access this mobility affordably? And that's really the underlying goal.
Expect to learn about the pitfalls of current wheelchair designs, easy innovative DIY solutions, and if you use a wheelchair, why it probably doesn't fit you correctly.
A manual wheelchair is a lot simpler than a bike. We can do this stuff. And so the idea is really, let's give some power back to the wheelchair users. Because right now, we're just being told, what's good for us, what we should have, and what we should buy.
Personally, I've been quite inspired by Erik since our conversation, and if anything, I've had even more questions than answers now. I found out he can climb stairs in his wheelchair, which is not only the holy grail and valuable skills that you can have, but he makes it look really easy, and it's definitely not, trust me. If you're a wheelchair user and you're looking for a role model, look no further. Erik is Mr. Wheelchair. I'm doing my best to signal boost this man's ideas because I think it will be beneficial for all wheelchair users. So I urge you to do the same if you know someone who'll benefit from listening. Without further ado, Erik Kondo. Kondo, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. The reason I wanted to get you on is because I find you quite a fascinating guy. You make innovative wheelchair solutions with, I guess, sort of reasonably priced everyday products. Maybe you could tell me a little bit better in your own words how you frame the open source innovations and the things that you do.
Right. So what I'm trying to do with the open source, the whole concept of open source is really to get information out there for people, information and designs, so that they can start accessing and making their own adaptive equipment. Because as we know, adaptive equipment is super expensive and pricey. And so the whole idea is if we can use, existing consumer products that are basically made for able-bodied people, which means that they're cheap, we can create our own equipment. And really, I've been a wheelchair user for quite some time, almost 40 years. And
oh, wow.
I look at some of these devices that I've made and I'm like, well, why didn't I literally think about this 30 years ago, why did I think about, this device when I was in my 20s, and now I'm almost 60. It's like the technology was there for a lot of stuff. It's just the thought was there. So to me, I'm trying to prevent all those 20-year-olds to, wait decades and be like, oh, could have done that.
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the main questions I wanted to ask you. How did you... like you say, you've been injured for 40 years, and I'd love to get into that later on. But you've been injured for so long, and then all of a sudden, in the last few years, you've had this sort of turbocharged, innovative, this vision to make these adaptive things for wheelchair users. So, what sparked it? What was the initial?
Right. I guess it started maybe about 10 years ago when I started, regarding doing the wheelchair stuff. One of the things I've always been really interested in is in mobility. And I have this device, this hand cycle. It's actually a two-wheeled hand cycle that was made by Grove Innovations, and it's from back in '93. And using a two-wheeled hand cycle means I get to balance, and I've always really enjoyed the feeling of balancing it. And as a wheelchair user, you just don't really have that opportunity. You got mono skiing and not a lot of other stuff. So to me, balancing involves the wheelie in a wheelchair. And I was like, okay, but what can I do that's more interesting just doing a wheelie? And so then that sort of led me on this kind of path. So the path started with, okay, can I balance on a board? Just hold my balance about getting on a board. And then, then I made different devices, balance, and then I experiment with a balancing board. And then I saw this guy Antonio Humbler on YouTube, and he was on a skateboard, just a regular skateboard. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Can I do that? How was he doing that? So then I started, following, what he did, and then created. Then I realized that really to make this thing functional, it needed to have a motor, right? So then I created electric longboard, and then that evolved to electric skateboard. And then I realized if I wanted to go off road, then it had to be I needed a land board, which is basically a giant, skateboard. And then, then I saw hoverboards out there, like consumer hoverboards. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could ride that. And then there happened to be a Toyota Mobility contest, basically, that I got involved with, which I got a little money to create a consumer hoverboard, for wheelchair use. So then I did that, and then adapted. Well, then maybe can I make something with a scooter? So these things just kind of kept evolving from there. So it just sort of haphazardly, oh, I can do this. Well, what else can we do? And how can we make these things so that other people can use them too? So that's kind of how it just kept snowballing and going along. But it's really driven by my need and desire to increase my mobility. And like, okay, how can I do that? And then how can I share that with other people so they can do it too?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have to say, hats off to you, man. I think it's so wonderful that every time I see you come up on Facebook with a new something, whether it be the Trike wheel or something like you've made wheelchairs out of plastic pipes, you've made wheelchairs out of wood, and it's just so fantastic. I think, wow, man, this guy's got such great ideas and he's following through on all of them. It's really fascinating. What do you have a background in engineering or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, I have a degree in physics and math, so kind of have that kind of type of brain, so to speak. But as for the most part, it's really been born out of necessity more than anything else. So I wouldn't really say that I have a hacker or a background rather than an engineering background. But I'm actually learning the stuff, learning CAD, learning all this stuff as I go along. But one of the things I like to mention is that really what I'm creating, it's really like so much stuff has already been done, and it's just a matter of taking what it is already exists and trying to make it functional and cheap. And that's really the underlying thing. Because if you have an unlimited amount of money, then sure, you can have all sorts of toys and this, that, and the other things. But for most people, you don't have an unlimited amount of money. So the question is, how can we access this mobility affordably? And that's really the underlying goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I admire that so much. What do you think have been your most impactful creations that you've made, and how have they helped other wheelchair users?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that I've created this that I call the wheelchair scooter boarding group on Facebook. And this was, and again, I'm not the first person to put a wheelchair on a scooter, right? Like, I had my own version of that. But what I noticed is, say, with the wheelchair skateboarding, that is there's only a few people who are doing that because it's relatively high risk. And it's pretty scary. So there's that. But then to me, like how, the putting a wheelchair on a scooter is actually not that hard. It's more complicated. That can be done by a lot of people. So I created this wheelchair scooter boarding group, and there's a lot of people in that group, and they're all sharing information between each other, and they're all doing the stuff. And I'm just kind of sitting, not doing that much. But I guess what I'm saying is that concept to me has helped a lot more people through that group, and that's really other people really helping other people, not so much me. As far as my own stuff, again, I kind of build one thing and then I move on to next and then I move on to next. So I don't know. I mean, I just hope that people are copying it because that's the whole point.
Yeah. Well, you're the only guy I've seen doing stuff like this on the internet. I'm not part of that forum or that group that you're part of. So the person who I think of when I think of these like open source innovations is you. I feel like you are the poster child or the face of this movement. So Is the website yours? Is open source innovations?
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
your website?
Yes, it is my site, and so it's really just kind of my holding area where I can, like whenever I create something, I can put it there, and then I make a blog post about it, and have pictures and so forth. And right now, I created again open source wheelchairs so that anyone who's interested that they can go to that area and focus in on that. So I think what stops a lot of people is they think it's more complicated than it really is. And this is a cultural thing generated by, the medical community, the wheelchair industry, saying, look, all this stuff is super, super complicated and difficult and complex. We know best. Only we can do it. And yes, we'll do it for you and it'll cost you $10,000 or more. And I'm trying to say, no, actually, a manual wheelchair is a lot simpler than a bike. We can do this stuff. And if you can't do it, you probably have a friend who can. And so the idea is really, let's give some power back to the wheelchair users, to people with disabilities. We need to take some power back. Because right now, we're just being told, what's good for us, what we should have, and what we should buy. And without power and influence, we just end up with crappy stuff. That's overpriced.
Or you end up with very good stuff, but it just costs a fortune. It costs an arm and a leg,
Yeah. Well, yes, there is true. There is some really good stuff out there, but generally speaking, I think there's just a tremendous misallocation of resources. And I'm going to use the example. To me, it's easy to complain about stuff and say, oh, this is bad. Like, Eric, what's better? I'm going to say, if you want to look what's better, look at the bicycle industry. Because there we see, okay, throughout the world, even in really poor countries, people have access to bicycles. Now, they might not be made out of carbon fiber, but they work, and they can get them repaired. And there's a whole, and us in the United States, you in Europe and whatever, you have a variety of choices. You can get bicycles, a cheap one or expensive one or something in between, and you can get it fixed. Now, imagine that world and switch it to wheelchairs, where people had access to a wide variety of wheelchairs, not just the really cheap ones, not just the really expensive stuff, things in the middle. And then they could just go and get it fixed easily and simply. So to me, we already know what works, the bicycle model. The wheelchair model is so far away from that.
It's a great vision, and it's such common sense when you say it out loud. We don't really have cheap wheelchairs, middle range wheelchairs, and expensive wheelchairs. We just have expensive wheelchairs or stock standard wheelchairs which aren't suitable for everyday use. Like your old hospital chairs. So I know what you mean. That it's really great when you say it like that. When you look at the bike industry, there's bikes for everyone. You know, and there aren't really wheelchairs for everyone unless you've got like an unlimited budget.
Exactly. So if you look, and I've been looking, so if you get on Amazon US, the top selling wheelchair, which sells on Amazon about $4,000 a month, is the cheapest wheelchair that China manufactures that you can get on Alibaba. Now think about this. This is a wealthy country that is literally, so the wheelchair that people can buy in the U.S., which sells like literally $4,000 a month, that top seller, they're buying in bulk from China from about $25 to $30 a piece. And wow. And they're coming in a container with like 500 wheelchairs in a container, coming to Amazon, right? And then they're sending it out. This thing is really low functioning. And my question is, why is that acceptable? Why is it that in the U.S. it's okay to buy for your parent, your elderly person, your whoever it is, these really poorly functioning chairs, when you could spend a little bit more and get something a little bit better? And again, the fact that this exists is just an indication of the problem, that people really don't look at wheelchair mobility as something that's really important. Unless you're in the wheelchair business and you're like, wait a minute, the way I can make the most amount of money is to sell the most expensive product that there is and overcomplicate it. That's how I make my money, right? So we have really expensive and really cheap and almost nothing in the middle.
You're right, and I think the only way that works is for the seller to make a profit rather than the end user to have the best experience.
Right.
So, and you got to kind of think that, in a profit-driven society, that probably is the reason that it exists that way.
Right, exactly. And the thing is to me, the free market works great in so many ways, but for wheelchairs and medical equipment, we need something different because it doesn't work. For the same reason, imagine a road system that was a for-profit road system. It wouldn't work, right? So the government steps in and builds the roads, and it works. So the free market doesn't work everywhere. It works in a lot of areas, but not in this particular area, which is unfortunate. And that's because it isn't a free market because it's completely distorted by the influence of insurance and government regulation anyway. So we're not really, so in no way are we dealing with a free market in the first place.
Yeah. So, and you've decided to do something about it single-handedly. You're like, hey, listen, we can make our own wheelchairs. Because I've often wondered, I've looked at my wheelchair and I'm like, why does that cost 7,000 euros?
Right.
Because I look at the tubes.
Right.
And I look at, what is it? It's quite minimalist, and this one's made out of aluminium. I've got another one made out of titanium. Right. Titanium tubes aren't that expensive.
Right.
It's not, they kind of market it to you as it's a wheelchair for you, but you can have it, 36 centimeters or 38 centimeters. Well, why can't I have it 37 and a half? Like if it's that personalized to me, why are you restricted? I feel like there's a lot of things that come off the shelf, they bolt them together. Yes, there are certain things that you can personalize about it, but that somehow justifies the massive price tag. It sucks, man. So
right,
I mean,
exactly.
like I say, a lot of wheelchair users get one wheelchair and that's it. They're like, well, this is it now. And if it doesn't fit properly, it's like, well, I can't afford another 7,000 euros or whatever for another one.
Exactly, and that's what's happening. So in the U.S., people are getting fitted in the hospital, and they're getting fit poorly, and then they get the chair that doesn't work for them. And here in the U.S., you got to wait for your insurance, you got to wait 5 years. So they're stuck for 5 years. Or what they do is they end up, doing a GoFundMe, and then they try to raise money to buy a better chair and pay for cash, which doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to go back to this question is, why is this happening? Like, why is it now? Because wheelchair fitting is not really a rocket science. Why are people leaving the hospital, leaving a rehab hospital with a poor fitting chair? And I'll tell you my answer to this is, and again, I'm going to use the bicycle analogy. Imagine you go to buy a bicycle. You have never ridden a bicycle. You go to a bike store, and the people selling the bicycles are not bicycle riders. The people who fix the bikes are not bicycle riders. The bicycles are manufactured and designed by people who don't ride bicycles, right? You buy your bicycle, you go to a skills clinic on bicycling that's run by a person who also can't ride a bicycle, and then they teach you. This is literally what happens in the wheelchair world, right? Like, if we laugh at this, we think about in the bicycle world, well, that would never happen. You go to a bicycle store and the person who sells you the bike is super into bicycles, right? Like their experts are throughout the entire process. In the wheelchair world, no. The actual wheelchair users really have no voice. Everyone else is picking for them. The other thing I'd add to that, to my analogy, is where do the therapists and learn about wheelchair stuff? Well, they look at research, right? Well, again, the researchers are not wheelchair users. They're using half the time they'll do research on subjects who are able-bodied, and then they'll take those conclusions and then write up a whole thing I mean, so basically we got researchers who don't understand wheelchairs using able-bodied people in simulated wheelchairs in a laboratory environment, creating studies and conclusions that now the medical community reads and says, well, this is what, this is evidence-based practice. We got to follow this. So again, in this whole process, the actual wheelchair users really have no voice. This is why the whole industry is all fucked up, And it pisses me off. It really does, because it's not that hard. Let's get some people, in chairs who know what they're talking about. Let's get them involved in the process, and let's pay them. You know?
And you think that's how to solve this problem? That's how to make things better?
I think it's one way. Well, so that would be one way to start at least solving some of the process. I think that the bigger process with the the wheelchair industry is is driven by private equity. So private equity owns large wheelchair companies, which have gobbled up the little companies, and that has seen a decrease in quality. So I gotta circle back to me, I have my injury in 1984. So and I'm lucky because only a few years earlier, people were getting the hospital chair. So it was really in the late 70s, basically a bunch of, badass wheelchair users are like, wait a minute, this hospital chair, this is bad. Let's fix it. Yeah. Let's make it better. Right. And they started modifying it. And then, so Quickie is really like the first company that's all, created by Marilyn Hamilton, who was a wheelchair user, and some others. And they started making, a better version. So I get that in 84. So I have a better version. Then in the early 90s,
what was your first chair?
It was a Quickie 2, a folding Quickie 2.
Oh, and nice.
It worked, and then in the 90s, there's a lot of little wheelchair companies, making wheelchairs, and they're making them pretty affordable. I bought one that was made by a company in Georgia, and they're making them simple and they're making them cheap, and they work. But then all of a sudden, Medicare changes all the billing codes and basically, creates the K005 billing code, which is an ultralight wheelchair. What that did is it put a price floor. Let's say that it was $3,000. So now, no wheelchair company has any incentive to sell a wheelchair under $3,000 because that's the price floor. Does that make sense?
Sorry, no. Can you just explain that a little bit better so I understand? So Medicare have made it that the minimum you can spend on a wheelchair is $3,000.
Well, no. So there's like there's multiple different types of wheelchairs, but the K005, which is an ultralight wheelchair, right? That's what we're talking about for the sake of our discussion. That's what I have. That's what you have. So these ultralight wheelchairs become have the code K005. A standard wheelchair is K001, and there's K002 and 003 and so forth, right? So what I'm saying is Medicare comes in, and let's say that they say that the reimbursement for the K005 ultralight wheelchair is $3,000. In that case, and then and everybody in the U.S. tags on with what Medicare does, the other insurance companies, is there's no reason to sell a wheelchair for $2,000 because you get reimbursed at $3,000. So,
okay. I think I understand now. That does seem very backwards.
So automatically, this is what I'm saying. So automatically, there's no reason to make to work on trying to make these chairs affordable at say $1,000 and $2,000. You can start at $3,000. So they have that, and that's so you have that billing code. All of a sudden, the little companies.
Why would someone make a billing code like that?
Well, there's so much effective lobbying and so forth within the industry. If you think about it, so what gets reimbursed is really in the U.S. affected a lot by lobbying. For instance, the exoskeleton made by Rewalk has just become Medicare reimbursable, which again, this is heavy. Only heavy lobbying can get that kind of thing done.
So just to give you some perspective, being from the UK
Right.
and currently living in Europe, I'm really unfamiliar with Medicare and the US system. So if something becomes Medicare approved for insurance, that is an incentive for making money somehow with the insurance company?
No, so what I'm saying is that if you're selling a product, right, you're a wheelchair manufacturer,
Yeah.
right, and you have a choice. You could, like a bicycle manufacturer, hey, I'll make one for $100, I'll make one for $500, I'll make one for, $750 and $1,000 and $2,000 and $3,000, right?
Yeah.
Now, Medicare says, and we'll stay with the bicycle example. You know what?
Yeah.
If you sell us a bicycle, we'll pay you $3,000 for any of your bikes.
Oh.
You're like, okay, I guess all my bikes cost $3,000 now. Well, there's no reason to sell it, right? That's what I'm saying. So if you qualify for insurance and you create an ultralight wheelchair, you will get $3,000. So why would you make it cheaper?
I see. Coming from a culture that has, I guess, a different healthcare incentive, it does seem quite a bizarre policy to have.
So now there's no little companies making, say, a $2,000 wheelchair because it doesn't make sense. So they all disappear, right? Or they get bought out. So now we just have the large companies. Go ahead.
Before we move on, if I was a small wheelchair company and I was like, I can make these wheelchairs for $1,500 and I could sell them directly to you, but if someone had Medicare, sorry, forgive me, because the whole Medicare thing is a little bit confusing for someone who's not American.
Right.
But if you have Medicare, the situation wouldn't be desirable because you'd be like, I'll get Medicare to pay for one. But would there still be a market for people that don't qualify for Medicare to buy these cheaper, more reasonably priced wheelchairs?
Right. So that's the cash market, and that is the problem. So we don't know because no one's really doing it. Put it that way.
Oh, I see.
I think it exists, but you have to make it. The difficulty is, and this gets back to this what I was talking to you earlier about Amazon and the 4,000 wheelchairs a month that are getting sold that are the cheapest wheelchairs that come from China. So if the mentality is it doesn't really matter, then you're not going to spend the $1,500. And this is part of the problem, is a lack of understanding of how important a wheelchair is and its design and its function is for mobility. It's appreciated. So again, in the bicycle world, it's appreciated. Like people know the difference. People know the difference when they go to buy a car. You go to buy a car, you're like, oh, this, you know about reputation, you know about all sorts of stuff. People get in a wheelchair and they're like, I don't know, whatever you tell me.
Yeah, I guess.
It's going to suck. It's supposed to suck. So even when it sucks, you're like, well, of course, it's a wheelchair. It's supposed to be bad. I'm supposed to not be able to do anything. So this seems normal to me. And this is part of the problem. So in the wheelchair world, you have really uneducated consumers. Because if you have an acquired disability, like how would you know? Right?
Yeah.
Like how would you know? So you don't know. And if you've grown up with a disability, maybe you've only had one kind of chair. So you don't know what you don't know. And I think that this is what I'm trying to get across to people is if you haven't experienced something, like you don't know that you can necessarily do it. And if you haven't seen somebody else do it, then you don't think it's possible. So it's just out of your mind. In the able-bodied world, there are so many examples of people doing so many amazing things that there isn't anything that it's very hard to come up and do something that no one else has ever done as an able-bodied person, because there's just so many examples of the amazing things that people do, right? But in the wheelchair world, like somebody jumps a 6-inch curb and people are like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's like, no, it's actually not amazing, because the standard is so low. So this is the whole thing with low expectations, which gets me back to, if you have low expectations, then does it really matter what chair somebody uses?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. So what is your motivation to change this?
Well, I mean, my motivation to change this is that I think that people with disabilities, wheelchair users, are living much less and below their potential because they don't know it, and society doesn't recognize it. So I'm going to give this example. When I talk about a wheelchair user, I talk about a system. So so the system is you, your wheelchair, and your environment. That is a wheelchair user system. And all of that affects your ability to perform in any kind of way. So when you leave the house, you're leaving you're in the environment, right? You're in your wheelchair, and there's a you. And what you can do is a function of all three of those things. So if you're in a house and you're if you're in an apartment building and you're on the top floor and the elevator breaks, well, that's your environment has made it very difficult for you to be mobile. Somebody puts in an elevator, you can be more mobile. That's the environment. If you leave the house in a hospital chair, you probably can't even get it into your car because it's so heavy and you can't take off the wheels, right? And you can't push down the street to your neighborhood store because it's set up so poorly. So now your mobility is dramatically limited. You're the same person, right? We set you up in an active chair that's set up properly, and all of a sudden you can transfer in your car. You can pop off the wheels. You can put it in your car. You can drive around, right? Your car is part of the environment. It has hand controls. You can drive it. It doesn't have hand controls. You can't really drive it, right? Unless you DIY something. So that's the environment. And then there's you, right? You spend all your time on the couch eating Doritos and watching soap operas. You know what? You probably can't transfer it into your car. You can't push in the city. So but you're fit, you push around a lot, then you can do more. So the system, the result of performance is the result of all three of those factors. And we as individuals can't really change the environment. We can change ourselves, not the environment. And then, okay, I'm saying to some degree we can modify our own chairs, right? But right now, if you can't modify your chair, you're just stuck with what society says you should have, based on what society believes is important to you. And what if you have different things that are important to you? You can't do anything about it.
Why do you think that more wheelchair users haven't done this already? Like, why are there not more sort of grassroots areas like what you're doing?
Well, number one, I'm sure that there's people out there we just don't know about doing it, right? So let's assume that there's a ton of people, like everything that's been done has been done before to some degree, I think that in general, what happens to a lot of wheelchair users is again, this is this lack of power thing, learned helplessness, that people just learn to accept stuff. And this is why I think even, what happens is again, most of the people, at least well over half the people I meet in their chair, it's set up improperly. I know it. I can just look at it and it's like, wow, this is not set up right. And then there's people.
What do you think the most common mistake is when people are setting up their wheelchairs?
Well, again, so this all depends on their individual capability, but pretty much axle position is a huge thing, right? And their axles are too far back, and that really impacts their maneuverability. And then a lot of people don't even fill up their tires, to 100 to the maximum. So they're pushing around on soft tires, which is super annoying and so much harder, right? So they're making things harder than they need to be. Most people are sitting too high in their wheelchair. So they sit up too high, so they don't have as much power and leverage to use the wheels. And that is because, getting back to research, determined the certain height that they thought was the best based on a research model that is not practical in the real world. So again, people are set up by the medical community that it's basing their decisions based on research of impractical situations, and then people are in their chairs, they're set up in ways that they don't have a lot of propulsion. They're not really strong. They have difficulty going up and down ramps. They're sitting up too high. They feel unstable. All of these problems. So they, you know what? They don't go out that much. It's just like a continuing cycle. And this is why I keep hearing, oh, there's 1% of the population is wheelchair users, right? Like that's 1 in 100. Well, whenever I go to like a big city, I see thousands and thousands and thousands of people before I see a wheelchair user, right? And I'm like, okay, where are they? And even in places that they should be out, that's like a smooth path, by the waterfront, like all of that stuff. It's like, where are they? If they're 1% of the population, I don't see them. And I think they're there, but they're just not comfortable enough getting around outside. And I hear them, so for a manual wheelchair user, there's a lot more you can do. With a power wheelchair, you're kind of stuck with the performance function of that power wheelchair. Right. There's not much an individual can do to make a power wheelchair more functional. There's a lot a manual wheelchair user can do to the wheelchair user system to make themselves do more, be able to do more. A lot. And that's totally not taken advantage of.
There's so much that you've said there, Erik, which I relate to, which I can resonate with. Like, so many, I didn't want to interrupt you, but there's so many, like when you say about the system, I think one of the things that really annoyed me in rehab was when I went to get a wheelchair fitted, they said, oh, you should get one a little bit wider because you're probably going to put on weight. Now that stinks. That's terrible advice. Number one, they should say, hey, by the way, you're going to be probably a little bit more sedentary. So try and exercise more, like try not to grow into your new wheelchair, like try and, it's just, again, and like you said about the environment, I think also when I heard you speak about wheelchair users, I'm the same. I go out, I very, very rarely see wheelchair users. If they are, they're old, they're in big hospital chairs, they're being pushed, and they don't look anything like me. And I'm like, God damn it. In fact, I saw some guy recently wheeling down the road, and I was like, whoa, like, because I live in a small village in the French Alps, and I was like, oh my God, that guy had a lightweight active manual wheelchair. Oh, I don't know what that is. I think that's a weird bubble that came up on the screen. So yeah, I spun the car around and I was like, oh hey you, I was like, sorry to bother you, but do you live here? And he said, oh no, I'm on holiday. And I said, what's his name? He said his name was Craig Gorry, I believe, if he's watching. And he was on holiday, and it's just so weird because you see someone that looks like you, and I'm like, oh, if he did live here, I kind of wanted to be his friend, I was like, oh come on, let's but he was just on holiday. He was here skiing, and he had a relative that works here. But anyway, it's interesting because you say 1% of the population, but I'm with you, man. Every time I see someone in a wheelchair, they don't look anything like me. And I think maybe there is a lot of wheelchair users that don't go out that much. They're not that visible.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the case. And again, and that's because of what I call frictions, right? So there are frictions. And to a lot of people, the friction of going out and doing stuff is a little bit too much, so they don't. And that's unfortunate. So if you can get them to be more comfortable in doing stuff, then they'll get out more. And it also creates a cycle where you get out more, then you're more comfortable, you can go farther. And I think that's really important. But I'm going to get back to this thing is the example that you gave comes from low expectations, because they said you're going to gain weight, so let's give you a bigger chair, because what difference does it make? Now imagine
that's a dangerous thing to tell someone in a very impressionable part of their life.
Exactly. Now let's go back to this thing. In what when has anyone ever gone into a clothing store and somebody said, well, you're going to get fat, so let's get you a couple sizes up, right? Like, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So why does this happen to wheelchair users and not recognizing? I think the other thing is I use what I call pizza math for wheelchair sizing, right? So, you order a small pizza, and you're like, oh, this is small. It's an 8-inch pizza, right? Oh, I'll just get a couple inches bigger, right? And then you get the 10-inch. You're like, oh, my God, I can't eat this whole thing because, it's pizza math. It's, it's a lot bigger. It's only a couple inches, So the difference between, so I'm in a 14-inch chair, right? The difference between a 14 and a 16 and an 18, you're like, well, an 18, it's only 4 inches. It's a huge difference. And it makes so much impact on your mobility. So the fact that people can just throw in a couple inches and act like it doesn't matter, these are the experts who are telling you this, right? This is not like, the person on the street. This is the expert. That's ridiculous and unfortunate.
You're absolutely right, man. And like I say, to have that happen to me, and I know that that's happening to other people, they're saying, oh, maybe get one a bit bigger because, you're likely to put on weight. Again, it's definitely the wrong message. And I think another thing I wanted to say was when you're being upsold a wheelchair, they want you to get the most lightweight materials. They upsell you carbon fiber, they upsell you titanium. They want you to have the lightest wheelchair possible, but they don't put enough emphasis on you being light.
Right.
Like, oh, if you get a wheelchair that weighs only 4 kilos, it'll be easier to push. Well, if you weighed 4 kilos less, then you would be able to push your wheelchair further. And there's not enough emphasis put on that.
I can 100% agree. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say a couple things, and I'm going to piss some people off. And I'm going to start pissing them off by saying carbon fiber is a stupid material for a wheelchair. And it is the latest and greatest thing. And to me, carbon fiber is going to break. I'm actually in a carbon fiber chair right now because I won a Panthera in a contest, so I would never have bought it. Right? I use it only inside because I know what, if I take it outside, I'm gonna break it. I know I will. And I have multiple chairs, and I like the way this one sits inside the house. So when I want to go out, I use a chair that's set up differently. Carbon fiber, if you crack it, the whole frame is gone. And if you have a carbon fiber down to the fork and you go to jump a curb and you miss and you're going hard, at that 8-inch curb, you broke your chair, right? And now what are you going to do? So this obsession with lightweight to save your shoulders is ridiculous. I think weight makes a big difference when you pick up your chair and you put it in your car, right? So the exception to that is if you're a small person, like I'm going to say, you're a tiny woman who weighs 100 pounds, you really need a light chair if you're going to pick that thing up. But pushing around a little bit of weight doesn't make that much difference. And particularly if your chair is set up properly. But what do people do to that really lightweight frame? They put all sorts of extra shit on that chair. They end up with like a 10-pound cushion, right? And then and they have also they have a heavy back, right? A heavy or orthopedic backrest that's too high, and has all hardware on it, and they got push handles and so forth. So now you got the super light frame that's now more heavy anyway. And I will say that getting back to Medicare, the codes that I was talking to you about, and I'm going to simplify here, the $3,000 K005 is just for the frame, right? So imagine that you have a wheelchair, and that wheelchair is really a bunch of reimbursable codes. If I just have one code, I only get reimbursed, say, $3,000. But what if I can create that wheelchair so it actually has 10 codes, all for different parts? That $3,000 just became 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? Because it's the whole
I think I see where you're
package,
going with this.
right?
Because if you have the frame And then, what about the cushion? What about the wheels? What about the hand rims? What
Right.
about the forks, the casters? They can all add on.
Exactly. So here's the thing. So the $3,000 gets you a basic chair, right, which is still functional and it's fine.
But without wheels.
No, with wheels. It's everything.
Oh, okay, with wheels.
The way the wheelchair companies the sellers make the money is the upgrades. This is the stock one, but you really need the sports one. The stock one comes with the chair, but you know what? You really need Spinergies that are this, and they're $1,000. You follow? So now we have two codes. We have the chair code and then the wheel code. And then we're like, oh, you need an orthopedic back. That's another code, not the standard back. Oh, you need, extensions on your wheel locks. That's another code. So every time they have a code, it's like having poker chips. You're reimbursed for more. You want to have a handful of chips, not just one.
I see.
Right? And guess what the granddaddy of them all is? The power assist, which is $8,000.
Yeah.
Oh, you need a power assist. So we just went from 3, we're up at like 15, 16,000 now. By the time you add everything else, this is how it works. You turn that, so this is where the money is made. It's not money. It's like a car. There's the base model, but you go in and you're like, okay, I'm not going to spend any more than $20,000 on my new car. And you leave spending 40 because you got every single upgrade. The difference is when you buy a car, you know those upgrades are just luxury. As a wheelchair user, you're like, well, I have to have it. Because if I don't have this, everything I need is for medical, right? That's what happens. So they leave with a chair with all sorts of crap on it that got reimbursed at a high rate.
Yeah, and so on the subject of these power add-ons, I've noticed that you've made some very reasonably priced ones out of standard things that you found. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Right. So the latest thing that I'm working on is what I call the Trailwind. And the Trailwind, and I have two versions. One, the Maxi, and I just literally tested the Mini yesterday. And they're made from standard hoverboard motors and batteries, and then some other a standard scooter motor controllers and some stop switches. Effectively, all the stuff that you can make these things for under $200. Now, the goal here is to use it as a power assist outside on trails, and so because a lot of people want to go out on nature trails, but it's a little bit too hard for them, and if it's gravel, it's dirt, and there's inclines. And the thing is, to me, the idea, again, I'm getting back to the idea of power assist, is to enable you to do more. And it's a power assist, which means you're still pushing. It's just like a power assist hand cycle. It's just easier to push. So you have a setting. And to me, you want to make adaptive equipment that is compatible with able-bodied uses. So for the most part, if people are going out walking the dog, maybe they're going with their family, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their husband, their wife, or whatever, their friends, right? So when you're in your chair, you want to be walking compatible. When you're in a hand cycle, you want to be bicycling compatible, right? So if I take off my off-road hand cycle and my wife is walking, it's not compatible. It doesn't work, right?
I see.
So I need a device that's compatible with her walking speed. If that makes sense? That's how you get people.
That makes wonderful sense, and it's interesting to hear your thought process here and how you're comparing the two. I love it. So please continue.
So that's what I'm saying. So if I one of my Trike wheels, right? So let's say I'm not using power, and let's say that I'm going in an urban environment where it's a little cracky and whatever, then I want to throw on my Trike wheel so that I'm compatible with a walking person.
Yeah.
As a practical matter, I can outdistance any member of my family by a considerable amount in my chair. So for me, like if we go to a city, wherever it is, we visited cities and, like London and Rome and this, that, and everything. It's not me that's like running out of gas. It's, it's somebody else who's like, no, this is too far. I'm like, really? Okay, whatever.
Unless it's up a big hill or a flight of stairs.
Yeah, well, if it's up a flight of stairs, that's one thing. But even if it's a hill, so again.
So just before we move on, just for the uninitiated, the trike wheel is basically a free wheel replacement.
Exactly.
And the other thing, I forget the name of it, but it's basically a smart drive, a replacement for a
push
cheaper.
drive. So I call a trike wheel. To me, a trike wheel is just a generalized name for any wheel that changes your wheelchair into a tricycle, which is a front wheel.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
So, for example, I have a free wheel that clips onto the foot plate and it lifts up the caster wheels, and that's what you're talking about. So for people listening, just so they know, the trike wheel is like a free wheel replacement. Essentially, it's the same thing. It lifts the caster wheels off the floor so the wheelchair can go over gravel and stuff without.
Right, exactly. So what I'm going to say is trike wheel is just a concept. A free wheel is a specific type of trike wheel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the front wheel, which is made by RGK, is another type of trike wheel.
Yeah.
And then there's a different one too. There's a number of companies that make these trike wheels, and they're all like $600, and they're also pretty large. If you have a free wheel, it sticks out pretty far in front of you, right? Yeah. So I made my trike wheel to be small, light, and cheap. It only uses a 5-inch wheel, and sticks out like 6 inches in front of my footrest. So it's small. And this thing is cheap. I'm using a $22 caster from Home Depot plus some parts. So you're making this thing for, $50 or whatever, And
does that roll as well as a pneumatic tire?
I think it works better. So I use that. So I have
better. That's quite a big claim.
So I'll tell you why. So I have two types of trike wheels. I have one that uses a 5-inch caster that's solid, and I use that on road races. So, and I use that on, so that's the same wheel I use on my chair that I've used on marathons. Thing works great. This is on the road. And then I have a trike wheel with a 6.5-inch pneumatic caster that I will use on nature trails. So I have two versions of them. And
what makes you think the one that isn't inflatable better?
It doesn't flutter. So,
oh, really?
So what happens with the free wheel, and I have a free wheel that I've tested with, and other people, is when you have a big wheel like that, number one, it's not as maneuverable, sticks out far in front, right? And also has the potential, it tracks in a straight line, so to speak. So you have this setting. So when you're on a bevel and this, that, and everything, it's kind of it's annoying. So when you're in the city environment, because the sidewalks and streets and everything is changing all the time, you want your chair to be maneuverable so it corrects very easily. And a smaller trike wheel allows me to do that. And I can go, and it doesn't flutter. So if I go down a hill, like say, on a race and like going 20, it will not flutter. And that's super important.
Interesting.
Now, the pneumatic wheel, the 6.5, will flutter. But that's why that thing is for trails. You follow?
I see.
So...
yeah. Why do you think the bigger wheel flutters? Is it just...
because, well, number one, these are relative... So keep in mind, we're buying consumer products that are cheaper, right? The 6.5-inch caster also I'm getting, on Amazon for $20 whatever dollars. This is not a high quality thing. But so that is, and it's larger. A larger wheel is more likely to flutter than a smaller wheel. That is why if you see a wheelchair on a court, right, basketball court, tennis court, they use really small ones, like 3-inch casters.
Yeah, that sounds so counterintuitive though, because I would imagine the bigger wheel would roll smoother.
It's not a matter of rolling, it's a matter of vibration. So caster flutter comes from vibration resonance, which is basically, if you think harmonic resonance, you have a little bit of vibration and it gets magnified. And so imagine, so if you're you right now in your regular chair and you're pushing hard and fast, do your casters ever flutter? That's what.
Yeah.
Do they?
Sometimes, but it's because the bolt that joins them was loose and it needed tightening
which
up.
created vibration.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So caster flutter can come from all sorts of places, but when there's a little bit of play, there's a little bit of vibration. When you're on a relatively smooth surface, that vibration keeps happening at the same harmonic resonance, so it magnifies. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's how you get caster flutter. When you're on a surface like grass or gravel, it's not smooth, so the caster can't flutter because the resonance keeps changing. So it kills the flutter, and you're not going fast enough. So you need a smooth surface to create the harmonic resonance that creates the flutter. So a caster that will not flutter, so you can have a shitty caster on a gravel road and it won't flutter because it can't get in that harmony.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, that's really interesting. One of the things I've noticed actually about my freewheel is that if it's not on completely straight, one of my arms gets more tired than the other because it's tracking one way and I've got to compensate with the other arm.
Correct. That is the worst thing because that's super annoying. Right? So you're literally like braking with your left and pushing with your right or kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's horrible because you need to, and this is why I'm saying that that mine works better because I don't have that problem. And that's because I have a smaller caster and it's in closer. So when I'm, say, doing a road racing kind of stuff, when it's really important that you're not pushing with one arm or being a little bit off center, And
yeah, of course.
And that, it's like, imagine that you're lifting free weights in a barbell, right? And then somebody puts a little bit of weight on one side and you're like, whoa, right? If you can't lift exactly equally, it's so much harder. And that's what the freewheel and other devices like that stick out too far in front and make it difficult do to you.
Yeah. What feedback have you got from the wheelchair community about the things that you've been doing?
I get, interesting. I get positive feedback. I also have my haters, and
really,
and I'll give you an example of where people get angry at me. They get angry at me when I was doing snowboarding, So I basically created a system using the again, we're talking about the skateboarding, I was like, okay, they can do a skateboard. Oh, snowboarding. Maybe I can use the same concept of balancing because a snowboard is kind of works the same way as a skateboard if you think about it, right? And so I created this device and I did it, and people are like, why are you doing that? You should just be monoskiing. And I was like, I'm doing it because I want to do this. And I've been monoskiing, for a long time. Don't I get to choose and try something different? And at that particular time, my daughter, who was also learning to snowboard, so we could literally go to the beginner slope together, and I could actually understand how a snowboard worked because now I could do it to some degree. I was, it was never to replace monoskiing. It was just something else, and people got really angry at me. Some people did.
Well, I think I'm not sure they got really angry at you. I think sometimes, comment sections on social media, they can be. It's just low hanging fruit, isn't it? People just like, what are you doing that for? But mostly you must have had some pretty positive feedback.
Yeah. So, in generally speaking, I think that people like the fact that I'm trying to not make any money off of stuff and saying, hey, look, I made this, go now buy this. This thing is the greatest in the world. I'm not trying to do that. I'm saying, look, this works for me. This is how I do it. And here's how you can do it too. And if you don't want
I love that.
If you don't want to use it, that's fine. Whatever, And this is why people say, oh, Eric, patent this and sell it. I'm like, no, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to patent this and sell it, because I want to, again, I'm going to go back to that, I mean, that 20-year-old, 25-year-old, Eric, like, he could have been doing a lot of cool stuff that he didn't do because he never thought of it and no one else did. And the technology was there,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a bummer.
I think that's one of the most endearing things about you or about your creative projects is that they're all open source. They're not making money. They're like, hey, the freewheel is $500, but like you could make this for 50. Or, the smart drive is 8,000, but you could make this for, however much you make
right.
that. And I think, and here's how to do it. It's on my website. It's open source. Try it for yourself. I'm not selling you anything. Just go for it. I love that, man. There should be so much more of that going on in the world. I think it's fantastic. What inspires you to make it all open source? Was there never a part of you that's like, oh my God, I could make it cheaper and sell it?
Because I don't want to. So in order to make a so let's say that I want to take one of these products and turn it these things and turn it into a product. Like, what are you doing? Then you're spending all your time, figuring out the design, figuring out how you can make this design, make it as cheap as possible, and basically have it made in China, right? And say, okay, I got to use this manufacturer and they're going to make it this thing. And then it always becomes a trade-off between performance and manufacturing price, right? And then you got to figure out your margin and all of this stuff. And to me, that takes the whole fun out of it. And also, I don't really have, I'm in a position where I can get away with it because I, income from other sources, particularly real estate and so forth that I've acquired over the years that allows me to be much more flexible. And I don't have a great desire to make money off of wheelchair users. That's the thing. I just don't. Like, to me, wheelchair users in general, we need all the help we can get. And squeezing every extra dollars out of them doesn't make me particularly happy.
That's such a fantastic attitude to have. Even if you framed it differently, like, oh, I'm not going to squeeze. I'm going to provide them with another opportunity that's even cheaper, but I could still make a little bit of money. You're like, make it yourself. It's €50. Like, you could get this stuff from the hardware store. Try it yourself. I love that, man. I love that. And I think, again, from what I've gotten from your communication is that your thrill isn't in business and making money. Your thrill is in innovation, and you're, oh, okay, I've done that. It's on the website. It's open source. Hopefully someone can help that. What's the next project? That's where the fun is, like, what's the next thing? And on that subject, what are your future plans? Do you have any upcoming future projects that you want to share?
Well, I got two they're more like physical projects. But this relates to all this stuff that I'm talking about with the wheelchair system, right? So one, there's improving, devices. There's also improving myself. So this Saturday, I'm meeting up with this guy. He's actually from England. His name's Colin, and he's going to be doing the Chicago Marathon as a fundraiser. And he's like, hey, Eric, last year I did this thing. It's called the 50 points, and in one day. You get a point by running a mile, drinking a beer, or eating a donut. And I got to do 50 points. And I was like, okay, I'll do that with you, right? The thing is,
nice.
I don't really drink, and I don't really like donuts, okay?
Yeah.
So that means I'm going to probably end up doing like 40 miles around the city. And you know what? I'm going to use one of my homemade chairs, to prove they work. Yeah. Right? So I got that going on. And then in the second week of June, I got to do, there's this New England Marathon series. And also in the same, plastic chair I made, I can do 6 marathons. So one after another in 6 states. So it's like,
oh, wow.
So that'll be interesting. I've never done 6 marathons in a row. But again, this is all to promote the fact that these chairs work and you can just do it and not spend a lot of money.
Yeah. So, what is the target audience for those wheelchairs? Like I guess from a vanity perspective, I wouldn't really want a plastic or a wooden wheelchair. But even though they work and they're sturdy, and you can do a marathon in them. What's the target audience for that? Would it be people in third world countries that can't afford them?
Well, yes. So the reason I really got started with making these kind of chairs out of that material, and I started with PVC, was because I've been trying to help out SCI in different low resource countries, specifically Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and now Pakistan. And then what I've seen is that lots of people did not have a chair. Literally, I've gotten chairs for people who spent over 10 years in a room on a bed with no wheelchair.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, think about that. And, similar injuries to you and me and what have you, because nobody got them a chair. And I'm trying to say, look, it's not that hard. Like, somebody can make something out of something so they can at least get outside. And that's where this all started. And that's where, so I started with PVC. And then I said, well, some of these joints for the PVC chair, I had to order. So if you can't order it, then let's switch to wood, because wood is pretty much everywhere. And the plastic was just basically plastic wood, and then I just created like different designs based on that. But it's really just to show people in low resource countries, look, you can make some chairs out of wood. And then I got a guy in Pakistan who's also spinal cord injury, who's been making wooden chairs and distributing. So the design, works. And the thing is, if you make a chair and it breaks, you can just fix it. That's the thing. Like, I'm not saying wood lasts forever. It doesn't. It breaks, you fix it, right? That's not the big deal. If you've made it, you can fix it. When somebody else makes it for you, maybe you can fix it and maybe you can't. And that's the problem. So even in a high-resource country, like, how many people have something break on their chair and they can't get it fixed, And it's just a small thing, but it's still, they can't do anything about it. So
yeah,
that's where this all came about. But regarding what you're saying is, okay, now imagine that. So where do you live?
I live in France, a place called Morzine in the French Alps.
So imagine that I don't know, maybe you have a big backyard, or maybe, there's a lot of nature areas, right? Well, then you could make a wooden chair that works better outside than your chair you have right now, and you could use it and trash it outside and not worry about messing with your own chair, right? Or maybe those people, so there's a lot of people living in rural environments who want to get outside more, or maybe they just want to go in their backyard and garden. They should have a second chair, set up with knobby tires, and a trike wheel set up as a trike, and they could get it dirty and leave it in their garage, and then have their other chair. Why are we using our primary chair, in a dirty environment? When
you're absolutely right. One of the things that really annoys me the most is when my chair gets dirty, because you come in the house and, it's just, it sucks. The wheels are really hard. Sometimes when you lean and you spin the wheels with some tissue and try and get them off, or, getting a dirty chair is just not top of the pops for me.
Right,
but
exactly.
I'm actually very lucky in the fact that I have two spare chairs. I have an RGK Sub 4, which I've got at the moment. It's my everyday chair. I've got a Tylite ZRA, which I bought all my chairs secondhand, in full disclosure, because they're, I'm not rich enough to have three wheelchairs.
Right.
But I've got a Quickie, which is my first chair. It's too big for me.
Yep.
But it's good because I've got knobbly tires on it, and I use it exclusively for riding my bike. And that is a chair that can stay outside in the summer. It can get dirty. It's fine because it doesn't come inside. In fact, it's just behind me, though. I don't know if you can see it.
But that's a great example. Keep going with that, because that is super important with what you're saying. Yeah. You use different chairs for different things, and you need multiple chairs, which means each one can't cost $10,000.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. But funnily enough, each one probably did cost about 7,000 euros at one point.
Right.
I bought this one for 1,000. This one was, I think, 2,000, and then my other one was actually 700 euros, which was very, very reasonably priced. A question that popped up, I want to spit it out while I still remember it. When you're building wheelchairs out of... Okay, let me rephrase this question. Do you think that you could build a more customized, better fitting wheelchair from an existing wheelchair? Like, for example, could you get my old Trike ZRA and make it fit me better? Do you know, could you customize it using the bits that already exist?
Right. So that comes down to how customizable the wheelchair was designed to be. So we have customizable and customized. Now, the reason I'm using it, because customizable is modifiable, right? So we need a wheelchair that has been designed to be modifiable, as opposed to the idea of a completely custom chair, which is so custom that you can't modify it anymore. Now, this is a little bit of the battle. And so to answer your question, it depends. We'll take a look at it. I'd like to see some pictures of you in your chair, and I'll give you my opinion on how you're sitting and seeing if you're maximizing, again, the wheelchair user system, right?
Yeah.
And so
I'd like that too, actually.
Yeah, so that would be an interesting question to see. But regarding the customizable and customized, we have two competing problems. So one, we have when you make something customizable, we have moving parts. And moving parts are subject to failure and breaking, right? Now, this is why, so my back on my wheelchair, or my Trike TR, is a rigid back.
Yeah.
It's not going to break. I know lots of people who have a folding back and it breaks all the time. And the way it's manufactured, it's going to break. And now, and particularly now that these companies are owned by private equity, but I'm going to ask you this question. If you're in the wheelchair business, do you want people like me who buy a rigid back whose frame is not going to break and who's going to keep his chair for a long time? Or would you rather have customers using a folding back that you knew was going to break and you knew they would end up having to repair and replace that chair? Who is a better customer for you?
I guess that's getting a little bit conspiratorial,
right?
Isn't it?
Well, it's conspiratorial, but that's how this is. It's not a conspiracy because this is how it works. You don't build, this is planned obsolescence. Look at the iPhone, all these things that upgrade. It's planned obsolescence. This is not a conspiracy. This is a free market. You don't make something that lasts too long, because then they won't come back to you. You make it so it has to be upgraded.
Yeah, I guess so. I've got the one that I'm in at the moment has a fixed back, but I have my Trike ZRA has a folding back, and I think that I know when I used it as my everyday chair, I used it maybe 5% of the time, but for those 5% of the times, it was really handy, and I didn't see it being particularly vulnerable to breakages. But
right, so I'm going to add to that. I'm not saying a folding back is necessarily a bad thing because I understand the logic of it. But I will tell you that if you talk to a lot of wheelchair users, a lot of them have broken their back on their backs have broken on their chair. That's what I'm saying. And it is a point of failure. So but this is the trade-off between customizable and modifiable and non-modifiable. So when you have a folding back, you can also change the position of the angle of the back rest. So if we have the chair right, and we raise the front, then we need to do this, right? So that gives us all this ability to modify. If you take that away, you can't modify it.
I quite like the ZRA because it is you can adjust the center of gravity, you can adjust the angle of the backrest, you can adjust. There's a lot of things you can adjust the bucket.
Right.
And I think, to be honest, when people are upsold the ones that are rigid, I think that's a little bit limiting. I know that they're lighter weight, and that's why. But I kind of like one of the things I actually really like about the ZRA is its adjustableness.
Right.
I love that. It's a tiny bit heavier, but I think it's great because, for example, I bought that second hand. And I can adjust it to myself. And if I sold that to someone else, they could adjust it in a way that was more suitable for them.
Exactly, and I agree with that. But I'm gonna go with this. And again, if we're looking at this from the profit making standpoint, if I sell you a customized custom wheelchair that I designed for you that you cannot modify, it's better for me.
I see.
Right?
Yeah. So we're on the same page.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to convince you that you need a wheelchair that is, quote, dialed in just for you with a fixed, okay, these customized, the modifiable is going to break. It's too heavy. Therefore, I'm going to make this just to your dimensions, and it's going to be perfect. And, by the way, it's going to be twice as much. But you know what I mean? And
it's going to be lightweight,
because I customized it for you. And now that I've customized it for you, it's pretty much not that useful to anyone else. But from my standpoint,
I get
that's good, because I don't want my chairs floating around and being secondhand and keep being used. I want to keep pumping out new ones. So
yeah, I guess so. I think a lot of people don't want the general consensus from the wheelchair community is that they don't want an adjustable wheelchair. They want one that's fitted to them. But my argument would be, I quite like, for the what was, I guess the pros and cons would be that the only pro would be that it's lighter weight, and that is definitely marketed to you. You want the lightest possible weight. But if you do get an adjustable wheelchair and it's not quite right, you can adjust it.
Right.
So I think it's probably better to get one.
I 100% agree, and I'm also going to add to this is that once you have a chair that has, particularly with the axle position, is fixed and you cannot move it, like this chair here, this Panthera has a fixed axle, I cannot move it. Who's to say what the proper axle position is, particularly for a new wheelchair user who doesn't know what axle position they actually like, depending on what they're doing? Nobody can say.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So when you create a customized chair, you're saying that you actually know the perfect configuration for a person, which doesn't make sense because their capability at point A is going to be different than at point B. And nobody knows what it might be. And again, you don't know what environment they're going to be dealing in. So you might want more stability in some environments and less stability in different environments, or how you live, or whatever it might be. So this is all marketing bullshit that is designed to propel the price of the wheelchair through the roof. Everything, I'm telling you, everything is about marketing and convincing people they need it more customized than it really needs to be. The latest thing is they've been trying to convince people that a wheelchair is like a prosthetic.
Yeah.
Have you heard this argument?
Yeah, and you don't agree?
No, and I'll tell you why. So, again, if I'm a wheelchair manufacturer, I want people to believe that a wheelchair is like a prosthetic because, number one, prosthetics are really expensive, right? Like a leg is $50,000, $67,000, right? So I want to go there. I want to go to that place where I'm convincing everybody that because now my $10,000 chair, maybe I can bump it up to 20, And I'm going to say, look, again, this goes with the thing. It has to be made to fit. This is RGA. This is RGK. Is their thing with, custom, why we can make it within a quarter inch. Now, the thing is with a prosthetic, think about this, right? It has to fit because it's replacing a part of your body that never changes. Like your leg doesn't change depending what environment you are in, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to have a custom because it has to fit because you're replacing a body part that doesn't change. A wheelchair is like a bicycle or clothes. You use a different wheelchair depending on what you're doing. A road bike is different than a hybrid bike, which is different than a mountain bike. And your hiking shoes are different than your running shoes, which are different than your clubbing shoes, right? They're all different, and you replace them. That's what a wheelchair is. A wheelchair needs to be different depending on what your environment is like. You need a different, different tires, different setup for outside than inside. When you're on snow and sand, it's different. And when you're on a basketball court. So you need a modifiable chair and you need multiple chairs. That's the difference between that and a prosthetic. And
That
that's
makes
what I'm saying.
perfect sense, Eric. You're talking complete common sense. I couldn't agree more. I have never heard someone put it quite so succinctly, and like you say, it makes perfect sense, but it's counterintuitive to the narrative.
Yes, but who's created the narrative?
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
Exactly.
The narrative is out there for a reason. So, I mean, if you believe in evolution and survival of the fittest, right, that things keep getting better over time, and I certainly do believe it, what people forget is, who does it get better for? Is it getting better for the wheelchair user, or is it getting better for the wheelchair industrial complex? Who's got the power?
You make a very good point there. Eric, thanks so much, man. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. Thank you so much for the innovations that you're making. I'm sure you're making the world a brighter place for a lot of people. And thanks for your time coming on the podcast. If people want to check you out, where can they find you?
So Instagram, wheelchair boarding. And then, for looking up at the wheelchair stuff, opensourcewheelchair.org will send you to the website, to that area with the wheelchairs. I also have, so that's the easiest way to do it. And then I'm on Facebook and so forth. But yeah, no, I appreciate, talking to you. I appreciate the opportunity, and, hopefully, we can get people started, with disabilities in, taking back control, because we need it, or actually taking control for the first time. We've never had it. So let's just get it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate you, man.
All right. Great talking to you.
See ya.
All right, bye-bye.